Your opposition to Common Core is twofold. One is a curriculum and two is a policy implementation. First off, we've been told over and over by supporters of Common Core that these are only standards and not a curriculum. Why is that misleading, bordering on an outright lie?
Because the standards are way, way more detailed than actual standards would be. They specify what needs to be done at a micro level of detail. In math, that involves programming the students clear from pre-K right into the middle of high school, and it specifies not only what order subjects should be taught in, but exactly what the methodology should be. When it comes to English language arts, it is a program that specifies in immense detail exactly what students are going to be reading and when they're going to be reading it.
Now, if you would, because I know a big player in all this is David Coleman, introduce us to him and what his role is in creating Common Core.
David Coleman was a Rhodes Scholar who came back to the United States and sought a career in teaching. Didn't succeed at that, but then founded his own foundation, and with Gates Foundation money, spent about a year and a half dreaming up the idea of Common Core. The crucial year there was 2007, and when he got the idea, he published a pretty naked version of it, explaining what he was up to, which was the idea that you could lower standards but sell them by calling it raising standards. And that's the paradox of the Common Core right from the beginning with Coleman. The idea was that because more people would pass the standards if you lowered them, then you could say you were raising them because larger numbers of people would be succeeding. There's a deception in Common Core that is there from the foundation documents back in 2007. He also had, I'd say, just a brilliant idea that the way to get national standards was to pretend that they were state standards. And he and his colleagues took this to the National Governors Association in 2008 and shopped it around to governors, Republican and Democrats, got a lot of buy-in with this idea. But the idea from the beginning was not that this was going to be a state-by-state basis, but rather use the states in order to leverage it into a national uniform system.
Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the role Race to the Top funds played in convincing states to sign up for Common Core. How did the Obama administration, how did proponents of Common Core bring so many states into the fold without ever seeing these quote-unquote standards?
Well, when Obama came into office, the great economic crisis had prompted Congress to pass the stimulus bill, and the Obama administration was saying it was going to spend large sums of money on shovel-ready projects. People might remember that term. There wasn't much that was actually shovel-ready, but Arne Duncan, the new Secretary of Education, said he had an idea, and that became the Race to the Top. That is, they would use billions of dollars of this new taxpayer money to implement the K-12 Common Core curriculum. What they did was offer a set of prizes. I think it was initially 15. It would go to states that adopted the Common Core. The problem was that the Common Core at that point was just a sketchy idea. There was no curriculum to look at. The states were given strict deadlines to sign up for this thing. And in the event, it was buying a pig in the poke. They agreed to make themselves Common Core compliant without knowing what that would mean. A few states held out. Texas did, Minnesota did, and ended up that 46 states took the bait, and they became Common Core connected, promised, wedded in effect, without knowing what the Common Core would be. The Race to the Top went through several rounds, and at the very end of the last round, after everyone had signed up and the awards had been given, we finally got a look at what was in the Common Core. It doesn't speak well to the states that did this, but I can understand their financial urgency. They were faced with declining tax revenues and a lot of financial problems. The Obama administration essentially bribed them into taking a commitment to something that would be proven good or bad only in the longer run.
Now, once it all kind of was seen with the light of day as it had come out, you write about something that's very interesting. Talk a little bit about how the Obama administration then weaponized No Child Left Behind funds to sort of hammer states that wanted to back out.
The No Child Left Behind law promised that states would be 100% compliant by the year 2014, and the notion was that by then every standard would be met by every child in the country, something that couldn't possibly happen. So what happened was that these states were under the threat that they would lose federal funding for existing programs if they weren't compliant with this, and the idea that came from the Department of Education was that they could just waive the requirement and say, you're free of this burden, and they would offer this, but if a state decided to back out of the Common Core, then maybe that waiver wouldn't be available. So it was used as a threat. It was used very effectively in Indiana, for example. The idea here is that the Congress never said that the Department of Education would be able to waive legal restrictions or legal requirements, but the Department of Education took upon it itself to use this as a weapon to make the states who had signed on to the Common Core realize that it was only one way in, no way out. And we are continually told by advocates of the Common Core that this is a voluntary state program, but if a state has second thoughts about the Common Core, it learns it's not so voluntary after all.
Exactly. Now, Education Secretary Arne Duncan, who, let's all remember, he's the former head of Chicago Public Schools, which former Education Secretary Bill Bennett famously said were the worst in the nation. But Arne Duncan had said in 2013 that opposition to Common Core stemmed from white suburban moms who all of a sudden their child isn't as brilliant as they thought they were, and their school isn't quite as good as they thought they were. You point out, and mentioned this a little bit earlier, that Common Core actually lowers the bar and doesn't raise it. How so?
It lowers the bar by setting standards that in many states are lower than the ones that the states had in place. In Massachusetts and California, the standards in teaching math were a lot higher than the Common Core requires. Because the Common Core is now tied up with standardized testing and the SATs, things like that, the schools are pretty much forced to lower what they teach to the Common Core level at the threat of their students not doing well on nationally standardized tests. That, of course, also ties in with the pay and incentives that teachers receive. It's a well-integrated system meant to lower the standards nationwide to a level that is comfortable for people who are concerned about getting the largest number of students passed through the system rather than actually educating students.
Finally here, outside of the dirty politics involved, which there's clearly a lot of it, what are your biggest concerns about the actual contents of Common Core as a curriculum?
Well, I'd say my single biggest concern has been the shift to what they call informational texts. This is teaching students that everything they read is a source of data. It's like saying that the most important part of learning to read and becoming educated is to learn how to read the manual for your lawnmower or something like that. That's being a little excessive in my comparison.
Right.
The notion really is that there is nothing out there that's worth learning for its own right. History gets chopped into pieces. Literature is taught by excerpt. Everything is sort of treated as kind of evidence for argument, and nothing is treated as really the pursuit of truth and knowledge for its own sake. That really reduces our educational system to something close to training robots. We are not looking at education here as preparing people to be wise citizens of their own country or to understand who they are, where their country came from, and where it's going. They're being trained to be people who know how to follow orders, take instructions, and see things in a manner that is strictly practical and utilitarian. That's the spirit of the Common Core. I give the example with the English language arts, but the same thing happens in math. This is not education for free citizenry. It's an education for a society of workers and drones. And the way that works out in detail, it takes a lot of explaining because the Common Core has hundreds and hundreds of standards. You look at them in isolation, each one makes a certain amount of sense, but you put the whole thing together, and it's an education that is kind of soulless and practical in the sense that you get students who know how to follow orders, but you don't get students who can think for themselves.